All right, looks like we're live. Welcome back to Conversations from the Underground. This is episode 15.
Mm.
What's up, man? What
How
you
you
got
doing?
going on? I'm
Oh
doing
man,
well, man. The weekend was great. The weather was great. We're in the first round of grading exams.
hmm
Despite the fact that we had like a week off or a week delay due to the weather, we lost a lot of time. So I'm moving quicker to cover more ground to make sure that I finish this semester strong, especially with I want to make sure I get to reconstruction and cover that properly. So I
mm.
might have to make some edits or some cuts along the way to get there.
Is that all you got? Is history 1301, or you got one and two?
No, I have three 1301 classes and one 1302 class.
Mm.
The 1302 class, I'm comfortable with getting to where I normally get, which is like, um, the Black Panther Party. We might venture into the 70s, considering Roe v. Wade is such a controversial Supreme Court case to consider, especially in today's climate and living in Texas. So definitely got to hit that.
Yeah, man. Same for me. I got four on campus this semester: two 1301, two 1302, and then I got an online World Civ 2 and an online 1302.
Mhm.
And honestly, it's the best semester I ever had. It's funny because when I was telling Dr. Haynes that when he came before he lectured, he was just like aghast that we had to teach that many classes. He's got one class this semester. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. I was thinking about this. It's sort of like how much university professors, how less amount of classes they
Mhm.
teach. So, put it this way: a professor who's been at UTA teaching American history under their specialty, who occasionally has to teach a survey class, who's been there for 20 years, like my professor, Dr. Morris. I've taught this class more than he has in his entire 20 year, what, in a few years.
Mhm. Yeah.
It just sort of kind of makes me think of the distinction or the disparity. Well, then, of course, you hear my wife, you talk to her about it. She complains. You guys you're complaining that you have to teach a couple classes a day. I got to teach six, seven of them every day.
Every
Uh,
day, man.
and I start thinking about that, the division of of labor when it comes to learning. What all do you lose um, or gain from these different levels? I like to tell people the community college is like a teaching place first, research second. University is research first, teaching second. Uh, but I tend to be someone who's a teacher first, teach and research first. Right?
Mhm.
I combine them both because I feel they feed off of each other. And there's this tendency to say that, well, community college teachers need to be better teachers, communicators, since they teach more. And professors need to be better writers and publishers because they publish more. But you know, maybe one feeds off the other. One improves the other more
One
than
definitely, I
I
mean,
think.
they definitely do. There's a relationship there, and then it has to exist. However, uh, I would imagine at the university level, because they have more time to do research, that also gives them time to process the information, analyze the information, reflect on the information, be very conscious about how they provide a new angle to the canon, if you will, if their research is adding to the canon. Uh, Whereas at our stage, because we're still teaching survey courses, our information is a lot more informative. Now, don't get me wrong, we're still analyzing material, we're still analyzing moments and situations. Our concern with our students at this level, I would imagine, is it definitely can be this relationship where you can research and teach at the same time. However, because research requires a great deal of depth, it may not translate um, in these introductory courses where they're still processing the information themselves. There, I believe at this stage, there's a greater need for relatability to the history as opposed to like a new approach or not a new approach, a new angle, which is what Dr. Haynes was getting at. You know, he's like, well, we need to have a more inclusive narrative, and that
Right.
if we include these voices, the narrative, the traditional narrative, will change. At our level, man, they just need to have um, it needs to make sense for them.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
history, like what
funny you
is
say.
how is history helping me right now?
You know, Jackie, um, forgot her last name, but she's no longer with us anymore. Um, she was a reading teacher. She also did that achieving
Oh
degree.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I forgot her name, but Jacqueline
Warm
Miner.
Jackie Minor yeah, Minor maybe. We were paired up once with one of these courses where the majority of the students in my course had not passed that
Mm-hmm.
course that they need to take the course. So what they did was paired that class with her reading class, and they were supposed to read for her what they were reading in my class instead of reading extra. So the idea was that you put them in the class instead of preparing them to pass the class to get into the class. If they failed the class, you put them in the class, but you also put them in the remedial course at the same time. And they
Mm-hmm.
read your material in the remedial course. And that first week, boy, she was like, I put your textbook that you're writing through one of these reader things, and it's like it's got graduate words. Like I don't even understand some of these words, yo. Uh,
Right.
it was a wake up call where I had to really revise and replace a lot of words. And sometimes you don't know that you're doing it when you research the topic so much and you learn it so much and you start speaking it so quickly. Uh, Trying to get all the information out. Sometimes you forget that you're talking to people who haven't invested as much time
Right.
as you have
Right.
in the material. So you gotta kind of feed it a different way, which is something I'm still working on, and I think all people should start working on now, given the state of the field of history, as we've already kind of alluded to in several episodes before, right? The
Mm-hmm.
decline of the industry as a whole, the lack of majors, the lack of jobs. And then, I don't think it's a coincidence that when we see the decline of this history, we're now seeing an increase in misinformation and people believe in things that maybe one could become uh, fall victim to without being knowledgeable about history. I think we're seeing the ramifications of a lack of um, interest in history with knowledge that politicians disseminate and are able to get people to believe, I think.
Right. There are definitely, you know, outside of academia, most people are getting their information from social media platforms. Um, even your standard mainstream news bases, news stations, will often, refer back to social media. What's trending? What's this? What's that? Um, and so we see that many of our students are um, they're gaining information, but yeah, it's the credibility of said information is um, concerning because we don't know as to the credentials of certain individuals spouting off information, and so a lot of misinformation can be had. Um, most people are digesting information within a matter of a minute or so, based on whatever TikTok or reel or stories that they're watching on Instagram or Twitter, Snapchat. It's just the reality of this new environment, and with the rise of artificial intelligence. I know we've talked briefly about Chat GPT.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware of this. There's some um, young people on Reddit, typical Reddit users. They were somehow feeding Chat GPT code so that Chat GPT, the artificial intelligence, began to uh, forget who it was. Like they were feeding it information saying, "You are now going to be referred to as Dan." Dan means for "do it," right now, or something dumb, some acronym. And it kept feeding this AI because that's the only way the AI works, by you asking questions. It scours databases to receive information. And the more and more you interact with the AI, the smarter and smarter the AI gets. Well, the Reddit users were interacting with the AI to such a degree that it was under the impression that it was no longer Chat GPT. It had morphed into this thing called Dan, and that Dan had 35 tokens. And for every wrong answer, he would lose 5 tokens, Dan would. And then at 0, Dan would die. So the AI thinks it's going to die if it doesn't answer the right amount of questions that it's being asked under this appropriate,
They did
parameter.
this with Chat GDP,
Chat
or
GPT, say that again.
they did this to Chat GPT, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Like they
Yes.
essentially, as a form of hacking it, maybe?
Yes, they've in essence. So I hate to put it in this fashion, but it's like they brainwashed
The AI.
the AI to believe in something that it's not, and then operate as such.
Well,
In
did
essence,
the
they've
people
hacked
who
it.
created it fix the problem, or is it still like that?
I
That's
mean, I think
weird.
they're working on it, but this is the danger. It's interesting. It's exciting and it's scary at the same time, because it's exciting because we have this new interface, or this apparatus um, that could parallel the likes of Google, but it's in its infancy. It's so um, fragile that you could have Reddit users, these just random dudes and ladies too. I mean, I say dudes, I'm using this interchangeably, but random people online can readily hack this stuff. And it's young people. It's young people who have the know-how, and they just get at it. And it's changing the whole way in which we receive information, who we're getting this information from. If we look at today, like when we try to go figure stuff out, many of us would just, oh, I just Googled it. I just Googled it. So much so that it's become a part of our lexicon. Like it's a
Mm.
part of how we do research to a degree. The first thing we all do we might Google something. We don't go to encyclopedias. We might go to Wikipedia, and that's changed a lot, right?
Hmm.
And of course, that is an area that has to be moderated to ensure that there's no falsification of information or misleading information. So as we enter this new era where individuals are learning by request, I'm going to go into YouTube and learn how to fix my car. Chat GPT, what is the best instrument to use to fix a Ford 2010 Mustang? Uh, as we get more and more comfortable with that world,
Mm.
the flow of information, the understanding of information, and the safety of information is going to be there's going to be pros and cons, right? It's going to be great in some aspects, but it could be dangerous in other aspects. The security levels have to be increased. Otherwise, it could be a pretty scary world.
Yeah, I took a philosophy of the mind class back, I think, uh, in 2001 or 2002. It's like my last maybe semester, or second to last semester before I graduated with my bachelor's. Uh, and we talked a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, and knowledge. And there was, there were a lot of discussions about, you know, the whole concept of artificial intelligence developing responses to what it's been designed to do, elevating its consciousness, eventually maybe taking over or something like that. But this reminds me similarly of of something maybe not to that extreme of taking over and controlling, but this idea that someone creates this artificial intelligence, puts it out there for whatever
Hmm.
purpose, but then as history develops, it responds to its developments around it that kind of turns it into something different, right? This is a good example about the intent of chat GPT compared to people's responses, creating it into something else, which then creates other responses that may turn it into something else, right? And it's like we're putting so much effort and preparation into these artificial intelligent uh, things. Why? It's interesting. Usually, it boils down to this idea. Maybe some for curiosity, but usually it boils down to this idea that we want to make life easier, more efficient. Uh, but it's almost like it's more complicated. Like you're going through all this work to do this when could have just studied for your test, probably for the same
No,
amount
no,
of
no,
time.
no. It
Uh,
goes back. It goes back to that concept of relationships. Where we were saying maybe it's more teaching,
mm,
80% teaching, 20% research, or is it 80% research or 20% teaching? In this relationship, the elevated individual creates uh, instruments or devices around them to make life easier. These are instruments of convenience,
mhm.
so that I don't have to go through an encyclopedia. I can do a word search and the information will pop up just like it would in an encyclopedia, but quicker. Now, the elevated individual has created these devices, and these devices have evolved, as you've acknowledged. They evolve and they transform their original invention or intention, and they've turned into something else. The systems have evolved. The devices have evolved, and then what that does is it compels the elevated individual. Now they're evolving. They're not learning like we learned back in the day. They're not the Dewey Decimal System. Get the ain't nobody using that. And I remember when we were young, probably I don't know how you were, but remember people used to go door to door selling encyclopedias,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
to have a whole set in your room. When I would get bored, man, I never go to my dad and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm bored." Boy,
You pick up that.
that he put me to work. So
Right.
instead of that, I'd sit by a shelf. I'd go to my aunt's because she would have one, and I'd sit by her encyclopedia, and I just pull a letter out, and I would just wait until I found something interesting.
Mm.
That's not these this generation or this new wave of individuals. Even as they're entering adulthood, many of them have been exposed to technology to such a degree that they're so used to information at their fingertips, they do not study like us anymore. And that to hold their audience is a bit harder nowadays, especially if you don't have consistent experience with it. Now, granted, and this is to go back to Dr. Haynes. Dr. Haynes is a well versed reader, writer, and presenter, researcher, of course. He's decorated. But if he's not um, in the gym, if you will, if he's not sharpening his presentation blade, his lecturing blade, um, he can appear a bit. It was we in the fight game they'd call it ring rust,
Yeah.
and it will be evident. Now, don't get me wrong, he's still Hall of Fame heavy hand hitter intellectually, but you could still see that ring rust from time to time if you're not engaging in that area, especially with the younger audience who are at the collegiate level, not the university level. When we listened to his lecture, I was actually fascinated with a lot of his research because we're more um, of that ilk. And this younger audience, they're looking at him and they're like, "What does Texas have to do with me?
Yeah.
Why do I care about Texas?" So that's where you and I would come in, where we have to bridge the gap, bridge
Yeah.
the gap.
You said something that reminded me kind of like a little. Sometimes I'll be talking about these knowledge darts that people got to pay attention to. when you're talking about going and sitting down in front of a encyclopedia, just looking through stuff until something caught your mind and then read it. I fear that this isn't happening enough in our world today anymore because um, technology has just put a whole nother spin onto this game. Like, whereas back then you could have found a profound moment randomly as you were looking at something. Uh, it's also a good example of how maybe being bored and being forced to do something that you didn't think or intend to do could actually improve your situation, which also doesn't happen anymore for the same reason. This reason I'm talking about is how these algorithms go, whereas you were sitting at an encyclopedia flipping it, these kids are looking at their phone, scrolling through social media images that are designed by nature to evoke a certain mindset or emotion or
Mhm.
response. They've been tailored towards them. They've been preordained before they even swipe practically what's about to come up. Um, this is a big difference that's shifted from our world back then when we were younger to now that I think is a problem that leads people into these self-referential loops that
Mhm.
just either reinforce what they already know or reinforce what they already disagree with, um, never stimulating the mind to open up new thoughts. Because one of the things with me, when I do history still to this day, because of that random nature of my stuff, I'll just pick up a book and I'll randomly open it to certain sections and just find things like this that I end up using in my research. And then I ask myself, well, what if I never opened it to that page at that point? Would I still have the same perspective? Uh, what I went in a different direction? Like the fact that I randomly pick up these things and open them up to certain sections adds a character to my work that's designed to try to, you know, skip up that uh, um, or trip up that cultural lens or that tendency to reinforce your own things. And I think people don't do this enough. And one of the reasons being, I think, is because we live in a perpetual state of boredness. We have to never be bored. And we can constantly distract ourselves from boredom. We've almost become fearful of boredom.
Mhm.
When in fact there's like tremendous benefits from that.
For sure. I mean, what you would do, like you said, randomly look through a book and just open up a page and find a story or find a reference or an analogy that would make sense for your lecture. Of course, you would do that, and I would do something like that because that's our work. For many of the people out there, because the profession is in such a decline, it's not their work, so they don't do that in regards to history. They may do that in a respective field that they enjoy, with whether that be art, music. They may the very things that you're talking about doing, we definitely do, but we do it for the sake of our work and also just our person. I think I agree with you in that more people should be doing this, but they tend not to because it's not their work. Like again, their work. I'm a mechanic. I'm an engineer. I'm an architect. They probably do that in those fields for sure. I'm a marketer. They do that in those fields because they want to spend more time. I mean, this generation is devouring information. They are constantly inundated with information, and I think that they're still having these profound moments that you and I had. When we would look into a book and be like, "Oh wow," um, and then that would enthrall us or whatever. I think younger generations still have that. The problem though is that right after having it, it's a matter of a minute or two before they have another one.
Mm.
And so they're they're constantly having those I'm gonna speak
Stimulation,
in
yeah.
jargon. Yeah,
Uh,
they're having the
they called it,
stimulation that's
yeah. Richard de Grand Prix has a great book called Ritalin Nation, where he calls it rapid fire culture.
Hmm.
He makes this argument that Ritalin became a medical um, uh, tool to repress a cultural phenomenon more so than a medical phenomenon. In fact, maybe it is a medical phenomenon, but the medical phenomenon itself was developed through the culture, which shows neuroplasticity and the ability of the brain to malleable or to mold itself over time to the culture that it finds itself in. But he would make the argument that, attention deficit disorder is a socially developed um, ailment as a
Right.
result of what he calls rapid fire culture, the constant inundated nature of information, perceptual information, as well as uh, mental, just constant sensory overload, constant moving from one place to another. Growing up in an environment where both parents are on the move all the time or are constantly going from one place to another, and then sitting down for some comfort, quiet time with more sensory information hitting you, right? Instead of like you're quiet and calm down and sitting down with TV and going crazy, right? And they would say that there's a connection there that has created this lack of attention span. Yeah, I agree with that. But also, the key that I was trying to get at is they may have these profound moments or whatever, like you said, but the nature in which that information is coming to them is very tailored. So it's reinforcing oftentimes what they already know or being preordained. Whereas when we were younger, we could catch something randomly uh, through this practice that wasn't intended to be thrown in our moment at that. That
Now,
makes
and there's some truth to that for sure. One thing I would add to that is the I believe that the information we were receiving might have been a bit more established or credible, only because I want to believe that. However, we have to remember much of the perspective, narrative, or lens we collect our information from, our narrative from, because we're of an older generation, was predominantly made up of individuals that wanted to perpetuate a traditional narrative of history, in that it was probably a white male talking about racial issues in this regard, female issues in that regard, immigrant issues in this regard. And when you look at people, and you're right, there are sectors of individuals creating content that already has this prefixed narrative designed to keep you pigeonholed in your headspace and perpetuate nonsense. Don't get me wrong, that does exist. There are also, with the advent of these technological spaces, we have a growing population of narratives that um, I would say they don't drum out, they don't rival, but they're different voices. I mean, you go on social media platforms and you're hearing, uh, let's say, a novice um, historian, but they're sincerely interested in history, and they're giving their history of Mexico from an indigenous perspective. You have someone giving their history of the LGBTQs community from their perspective. You have somebody giving their perspective on Ukraine while in Ukraine. Um, there's a growing population of content creators that is way more diverse um, than the generation that we grew up with. And so those are positive things, I think. Um,
of
and
course.
but I'm not sure if those things drum out how the medium can be manipulated and used
So
for sure.
yeah, because they were there when we were young. We just weren't. They didn't have the platform to be able to see them, right? I mean, Carter G. Woodson been speaking the truth for a while. Du Bois been
Mhm.
speaking the truth for a while. Just where they got their way to. So yeah, I agree with that. But on the problem with this though is we may have a lot of these voices now, but people don't get exposed to voices beyond the one that they have or feel connected to. They can develop their own voice and end up in these silos where they see nothing except that which reinforces their voice. More
Yep.
so now than ever. Maybe that's a part, what we would call a culture war, maybe, right? Where you got these people taking sides without ever even having a desire to look at the other side or perspective or even meet common ground or anything like that. Um, that has become more profound, more difficult to resist, I think, even um, as a result of, not as a result of more voices, because I think it's good to have more voices, but more so as a result of the nature in which people rely on their information. Like, you know, um, when you spend a little time reading through things that are random or reading through things that may not fit your view, new creative spin and perspectives on things can arise.
Hmm.
This is why it's so important to have so many voices talk about a history or something like that, because what you bring, your cultural lens and the lived experiences that you've developed over these times, will have an influence on the way you perceive an event. So if we have more people with a bunch more different lived experiences and perspectives on things talking about stuff, it's going to lend itself to have more meaning and more voices being heard, which is a good thing. But we also have to also understand that it's a good thing because it began by looking at knowledge a certain way. Those voices were able to be developed in the first place because of this drive to look at things and get information in many different avenues instead of the same source of an algorithm feeding you information.
I mean, I would argue that the algorithm back then was just mainstream news. The New York Times was an algorithm.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal was an algorithm. And even though you had individuals like Carter G. Woodson, W.E.B. Du Bois, um, Marcus Garvey, even though they published works and documents for people to read, again, they're not on the platform like an NBC, an ABC, a CBS. These new social media platforms um, provide these various voices with opportunities, but again, that's a gift and a curse because you become one voice in a bucket full of voices.
Mm.
So you
Yeah.
don't have
I think it
a
was
narrative.
easier. I also think it was easier to recognize those biases when you had those small dominant areas taking control of the narrative. Whereas now the technology's gotten so out of hand that you throw some scary music on some stuff, you know, video real quick. Next thing you know, dang, George Bush flew the airplanes directly into the Twin Towers.
Right? Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. And you're right because now they're so inundated with information. They are now finding it difficult what is real and what's not real.
Yeah.
What information is real and what's not real, and that's the value that I think the angle we should be taking now more than ever at our level is that's why it's imperative that we teach critical thinking skills in our history classes because we're in a world that I believe, and as I mentioned before in a previous podcast, where Du Bois argued that we were going to deal with an issue in the 20th century, and that issue would be the issue of the color line.
Yeah.
I think the issue of the 21st century will be the issue of the identity line. That what we identify as to be real or not real, fake or not fake, how we identify as individuals, culturally, nationally, state-wise, is going to be our biggest struggle moving forward. An issue of identity. You know, you hear people talk about identity politics and how tribalistic that can be. You know, do you want to be on this side? Do you want to be on that side? One thing I think um, in regards to people finding themselves in these encapsulated algorithms of information. And at the end of the day, man, human nature, we don't want to be wrong. We don't, we have our beliefs, and we want confirmation of those beliefs, because heaven forbid that we spent 5 years, 10 years investing in something only to find out that it wasn't true. That can be earth shattering for a lot of people. Religion is a big example of that. And I think this is where history again comes in to help, because real research, and this is why I found it difficult to do research and teaching at the same time, because research requires a great span of time that you may not see the impact of the research in the moment. You can see it probably like 10 years later, but real research may require you to have to re-alter your thesis,
Definitely.
reevaluate your position. And some people, I've met many people that developed a thesis, they developed an argument, and then they would go and do research, and in the face of evidence that showed them otherwise, they ignore the evidence and just continue using whatever they want just so they can
So
facilitate or support their original thesis.
I would say that's the main. I mean, what you just described is the history of science, right there. According to Thomas Kuhn in that powerful book, Structure of the Scientific Revolution, where he's like, Aristotle came up with all these ways of understanding science, and people after him started replicating these things, and they'd find stuff not working that wouldn't add up to what he said, so they swept it under the rug. He calls them
Right.
anomalies, right? But as over time, the anomalies just keep building up. I mean, you keep sweeping stuff under the rug's going to start getting bigger to the point anymore, unless you move that mug out the way. And then what happens is they mound up, and then you have these paradigm shifts where somebody like Isaac Newton sees an apple drop, and then it just wakes him up, because he didn't just wake up right there. When he said he was built on the shoulder of giants, what he meant was there are all these anomalies that just kept adding up until one moment I see this creative thought comes to mind that allows me to bring all those anomalies into the theory, restructure the whole thing, and develop a new theory of science, which occurred after that, and then the Enlightenment, and then boom, people keep going, people get drunk on science, and then here comes Einstein with the same thing, with all these different anomalies that were swept under the rug. Now you have a whole Einsteinian revolution where it changes
Right.
entirely, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like it's almost as if the system's designed in this way to try to get, you want recognition, you want status or whatever, you need to publish, you need to get it done quick. You put something in there that's easy, as opposed to changing your views that started your pursuit in that direction in the first place, which is a big problem. We have to be more conscientious and aware, and have a more stronger value for the knowledge, instead of the person or this ego or the self disseminating that knowledge. I think that's the key here, which is why it's so important what you think about, right? Like what you pay attention to. This is, kind of what you're describing to me here is like the quintessential catch-22. That's what knowledge and critical thinking is, right? It's this catch-22. It's got all this great, then it's also got all this problematic stuff that we got to be aware of.
Yeah.
We want you to pursue it, but we pursue it wrongly, right? You have to think of these things, keep them on your mind as you're moving forward, and understand that it's a struggle, and that it may not always work out the first time, and that's okay. You got to keep working, keep paying kind of attention to the path or the knowledge, instead of your position in the development of that path, maybe.
No, for sure. I mean, it's, when people have access or they gain certain knowledge that might liberate them, might make them feel a certain type of way in that moment, this aha, or it's profound, right? they'll want to perpetuate that because they recall how that altered them, changed them. And this, again, despite the fact that they've encountered new evidence or new information that might refute their previous position, it's a lot of it is ego and our inability to say, man, you know what? I was wrong. Let me fix that. Let me change that. Let me readdress that. And again, that in essence is life research. That's research in life, and that through my lived experience, now I have to change my lecture on chapter 1. I have to change my lecture on chapter 3. I have to change my lecture on chapter 16 in order to get there. I'm gonna have to cut some things out in order to put more emphasis on this. And so you're constantly changing, and then people can't wait to call you a hypocrite for changing. And so here's the
Mm-hmm.
catch-22. You gain this knowledge, and here's a problem I think a great deal of people have is that because you have that knowledge, you think that knowledge defines you, or because
Mm.
you have an idea that idea defines you. And so when people question that knowledge or people question that idea, we take offense to it because now you're questioning me. And I think that's the problem entirely, that we should have this knowledge, but we don't have to hold on to it. It's ours to use, but not to own. Let it go. I remember this quote from not a historian, a comedian, Patrice O'Neill. He goes, "Try to have an opinion, but don't let that opinion have you.
Mm.
Try to have an opinion, but don't let that opinion have you, man." I think we get married. At times people get so married to ideas that we can't ever imagine a possible separation or divorce from that idea.
Right.
That knowledge is to be used in that moment to provide you with, or to provide others with access or greater understanding. That's all. And if I have to let it go, then I let it go. Um, and I think if we
Yeah.
operate more in that fashion, then we'll be more comfortable saying, you know what, I was wrong.
Right.
I think I was
Yeah,
wrong there. Let me fix that.
for sure. And and to add to that, I think um, not only is this something you need to pay close attention to, but you also have to understand that while you're pursuing this knowledge, um, that your mind becomes absorbed by the process. Your understanding of normality, your identity, what you think is right and wrong, all these other types of things um, develop through the thoughts that you spend your time uh, thinking of or acting on. And if you're not aware of this, then you're going to continue to just eventually at some point begin to just look for um, what's already in your mind outside. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you get so offensive or angry when this knowledge that you think you had goes off or something, because you become so accustomed to it.
Mhm.
I guess my quote here that would fit, I think, with what I'm talking about, comes from Marcus Aurelius, who was an old
Mhm.
Roman emperor, when he says the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. This is what I mean. Like you think these things so often that your being becomes kind of one with them, that you start to kind of, they start exuding from your being, and you lose um, opportunities for growth um, along the path, if you fall victim to this catch-22 that we're trying to describe here.
No, for sure. I mean, how else can you have growth if you're not walking down a path that might be mistaken
Mm,
or misunderstood?
right,
How or why would you expect me to have the wisdom of a 40-year-old when I'm 15? I'm gonna make mistakes.
right,
I think maybe that we're in an environment where we don't want, or we try to shelter individuals from making those type of mistakes, but we have to let them fall.
right.
And I think so I have students that just finished up an exam today, And I know walking out, they don't even want to look at me because they feel like they failed.
Mm.
And I just have to constantly remind them, it's like, yeah, we fail sometimes.
Right.
We get punched in the face in round one. The question is, when the bell rings and you go back to your corner, do you want to get up off that stool and go to round two?
Right.
You know? And if you think one punch in the face or one failed exam is going to be the end all be all, I mean, it's demonstrative of one's character. I had one student that was like, I didn't know we had a test today. He
Mm-hmm.
dropped the class. He dropped the class in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm over here grading. I'm grading papers. I get an email update from TCC. The following students have withdrawn from the class,
Yeah.
and it's just he couldn't handle it. And it, not to no fault of his own, is that he's never been tested.
Right.
That
Hopefully you
if and
can.
when we encounter this information, how do you respond?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, you got to learn to pick yourself back up, man. That's why you fall in the first place. And if you never learn to pick yourself up, particularly, I mean, one of the best times to learn is at the community college, because when you transfer to the
Right,
university, transfer with a GPA that starts over. Which is why I look
right.
like this cum laude genius student on my record at the university. Well, I made all my mistakes at the high school and the community college level. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Follow me
Get him.
uh, with to UTA. They followed me with a T, not a C. Um, in fact, I made the C in History 1302 when I took it at the community
Mm.
college, and now I teach that class. So, like, talk about falling and learning to pick yourself back up. I mean, you gotta do that. It's important part of the process.
Yeah, for
For sure.
sure.
And you know, and that's one of the things I worry about with some of these like ETS students, or these students that are in early college, high school,
Oh, right.
or dual credit courses. It's like they've been taught that they're so smart because they passed this objective uh, ABC test and were able to write X amount of paragraphs with X amount of sentences in each, and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they're told that they get good grades, and then, you know, they have like breakdowns when they're 16 and they come and they get a D on my first test, and they've had nothing but
Right,
A's, and they're
right.
just shocked. You know, it could be devastating for them,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we have to sort of take the time to explain to them the importance of what we're describing here, of falling and picking yourself back up, and the catch-22 of knowledge, and putting your body and mind through stress. Let it
Right.
let it let it bend. You know, let it do all kinds of things on its journey to where it's
Their
ultimately
lack of
going.
yeah, the lack of exposure
Sure.
has made them weak, and not weak in the physical sense. I mean, we could go that route, but and when I say weak, not in a um, not necessarily in a negative sense. It's just that they haven't developed their resiliency, resistance that with pressure, um, they'll be cut from stone when when they're done. But this is part of the process. It's a learning process, and with time and maturity, you you get those things. And this is the difficulty of having those early college, high school students at times, is that they may have the intellectual chops to regurgitate this and that, but to fully understand certain ideas or concepts, that may require some time.
Yeah, and on the flip side, it requires courage amongst the professor in the face of
Mm,
structural administrative agendas that are
for real.
about passing and getting
Mm-hmm.
people through, and all these, just teach them what they need to know to pass and stick to the facts and anything, you
And
know,
that's not even
whatever,
that,
eliminate the ability of them to come complain or any of these kinds of things. You got to
man.
be you got to be courageous in a sense to resist that, or else it suffers. That's why I try to tell these fools, like, you don't understand what one class can do in the culture of things. Like, you just pass people along, and you're just like, whatever. Like, you don't understand how much that's reverberating and
Right,
shifting things.
right.
But
And I'm just
yeah,
glad that we don't
I
have
just
to
need my
deal with
paycheck.
it.
You know,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm just glad we don't have to deal with it like most educators do K through 12,
Yeah,
where it seems like
it's our,
that's where
our
they live in that world.
exactly. They live in that world, and so I can tell my wife as someone who's in that world and resist it. It's like you're up till 2 o'clock in the morning. You have to like write essays over everything that you respond to
Mm-hmm.
them to make sure you are legitimate, or you could easily just give them all an A and nobody will give a dang what you
Nope.
wrote. But
But the moment you give them an F, you better have all your
yeah,
receipts.
oh, yeah, you know what I mean. And it's just like it's a lot more work that a lot of people aren't dedicated or passionate enough to really do the way it needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the at the end of the day, because I'm I get asked this, Mr. Sauce, are you ever going to go teach at the university level? I go, I don't think so. One, because I don't meet the academic requirements. Two, my interest or passions are not really in that realm. I don't disrespect it. I mean, we obviously need good researchers and good writers, um, who take the time to put out great work for individuals like myself to use. Uh, but I mean, I would rather be teaching all day, every day, lecturing all day, every day. Um, and so I feel like this is the best place for me to be. Like I lucked out, because this is a place that affords me the opportunity to. And when I say place, I'm not talking about TCC. I'm just talking about college in general.
Level, yeah.
Um, it affords me opportunity to get in that lecture room, and with almost little oversight, I'm free. I'm free to kind of give my perspective, and I tell my students all the time that, as I'm giving that perspective, shooting from the hip, man, I might make a mistake, but I thought we could do that,
Yeah.
But now it's like you can't make a mistake anywhere, because I'll record you, and then I'm going to hold you to that mistake, and then I'm going to
Mm,
remind you of that mistake because I have it recorded.
yeah.
And then anytime you come up positive in any capacity, we'll just don't forget, let us remind you, because we
Yeah.
have the recording.
Right.
So,
Right.
these things will never. We live in such an interesting world about, and in this, like, we have to be right. We can't afford to be wrong, apparently, which is tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I think that's a manifestation of cancel culture, right? For lack of better words. I mean, I hate when I have to end up using highly charged words on either side of the political spectrum in a culture war like we're the ones we're in now. But I would say, rather than use the word, I'm describing the word. I think that cancel culture as a term means what it means as a result of this uh, status driven desire to expose and gain some sort of social capital in the process of this exposure,
Right.
right? But,
Mm-hmm.
look at me because I got to see this and do this, and it's the new reality TV star trend in a way, in order, get
It's definitely
likes.
created an interesting attitude in society. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Right on, man. Well, I guess we're
All
done
right.
for today. So, looks like we did a little bit early. We got two pretty interesting quotes, I think, that we left with, right? Just to reiterate them. Patrice Jones, comedian, try to have an opinion, but don't let that opinion have you. And
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Both, I think, combined reflect this issue of, the catch-22 when it comes to learning and the importance of it, and what we spend our time thinking about, and why it's important to allow ourselves to fail when we need to, so that we
Yeah.
can pick ourselves.
To mess up, man. By
Yeah.
the way, speaking of messing up, it's Patrice O'Neill.
Oh, my bad. Patrice O'Neill. Got you.
You see,
Perfect.
we just.
Right. I said Patrice Jones. Oh, I said Patrice Jones, Southside Community Gardens on my mind. That's probably what it is. Patrice was the
Fair enough.
founder.
Fair enough.
Patrice O'Neill. Right on, brother. All right, man. Well, I'll catch up with you.
All right, man. All right, take it
Peace.
easy.